Do we know everything there is to know about a push-up? Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. Man, we're coming off a great week last week. Great questions from last week. So some of those videos are very, very deep and informative. So take advantage of those. Go back through the Instagram or on YouTube. Those of you that are on I've Asked You, last week's Q&A, which was killer, is now posted. We just got off the intensive Facebook group call yesterday talking about cool stuff like the difference between right and left ACL injuries, and demonstrating amazing changes in the intensive Facebook group as well, with people applying the model very effectively. So lots of cool stuff. I'm hoping this week is at least as good as last. So with that in mind, let's dig into today's Q&A. This comes from Malti, and Malti was on the coffee and coaches conference call last Thursday, so we'll be there this Thursday, 6 a.m. Please join us. And Malti says, thanks so much for a great call this morning. You're very welcome. I have a question based on the discussion of push-ups and internal rotation force production. I've used tension and radiation techniques in the typical push-up coaching cues that involve telling a client to break the bar or peel the floor apart. While definitely a successful method of getting the abdominals involved, these tactics would seem to favor external rotation of the glenohumeral joint. Does this have implications on force production, and is there a better way to coach this, broadly speaking? Thank you. All right, this is actually a really good question, because I think push-ups are one of those exercises that are poorly executed by a number of people. And so if we understand a little bit more about how we're actually moving through space and how we're actually producing force, I think we're going to get a lot better at, number one, coaching them, and then number two, making decisions as to whether it's even an appropriate exercise for someone to perform. Let's start with the dirty little secret about the push-up. Most folks would say that the top position of the push-up is the start position, and the bottom position is the end position, and I would respectfully disagree. We have to reverse this process. We have to think a little bit differently, and I would compare this to how we would say that the first squat is performed by a young child. So for those of you that have small children that went through this evolution from the ground up, where they learned how to stand, they didn't stand and then squat and then stand back up. They actually moved into a squat and then stood up. So we want to look at the push-up from the same perspective, that the bottom position is actually going to be the start. And so if we look at the upper extremity relative to the hand, what we're going to see is that we're going to be in an early phase of propulsion. And so this is going to be towards an external rotation bias. And if we move towards the top, we're going to move towards middle propulsion, but we're never going to quite get there. And so we're always carrying a little bit of this ER bias with it. Even as the force production increases, we need to hang on to external rotation. So Malti, your intention of maintaining this ER cueing throughout the push-up is actually quite accurate. We need to be able to hang on to that, which means we're going to need some posterior expansion throughout, because we're never really going to make it through towards that middle to max propulsive position through the upper extremity. If we look at the shoulder girdle itself, the shoulder girdle is going to maintain that ER bias throughout. And so the thing that we always want to remember is that this internal rotation is superimposed upon the field of external rotation. But let's be clear here that this is not an arc. It is not an arc. It's a four-dimensional space that actually changes shape depending on what position you're in, and then the compression and expansion strategies that you're going to utilize, because we're going to show a massive IR bias here at the end of this little talk, where we actually take away a ton of the external rotation. If we move down to the hand, we can look at the hand as it moves through higher force production, very much like we do a foot. So let me grab the foot real quick. And so if we think about like an early propulsive foot, we have this externally rotated tibia, we've got an arch in the foot, and then as the tibia translates forward, we have this drop of the arch. Now, if I started in an early propulsive strategy here and I move towards this middle, but I don't quite get there, you'll see that the arch does drop down to a small degree as the tibia starts to internally rotate. And we're going to see the exact same thing going through the hand. But because we're not going to reach max P, we're not going to see a maximum pronation through the hand, but we are going to see it move in that general direction. So once again, we do have movement towards internal rotation to produce the higher force, but we're maintaining the ER bias. Now, at the thorax, the scapulae are going to move towards one another to promote compression through the higher force path as you move through the push-up. But at the top, you should see a recovery of that posterior expansion. So we're going to see a fairly strong yielding action in that posterior thorax to help us maintain the compressive force into the ground and to maintain that yield that we need posteriorly. The way that I would look at this is that your scaps should be friends, but they should never meet. We don't want to see scaps that are compressing against one another. That's going to be a compensatory strategy to magnify the amount of compression. So let's go ahead and talk about some of these faults that are going to show up in a lot of the push-ups that you're going to see or attempt to coach. Most of these compensatory strategies are to increase a compression strategy or to gain internal rotation. So once again, we're going to see this medial border of the scapula try to compress against the dorsal rostral thorax. And so if we see a magnification of that, we're going to see the scapula approximate, which is again trying to capture this internally rotated orientation to produce force. Anytime you see an increase in lumbar curve, so if you see somebody that is performing a push-up with traditional extension, what they're trying to do is they're trying to internally rotate into the ground. So they're trying to capture more internal rotation and create some downward force because they can't do it otherwise. Scapular elevation is going to be another common compensatory strategy. This is another attempt to capture internal rotation, as is the humeral position moving away from the body, which is going to move it towards more internal rotation. You'll see something as strong as a forward head also trying to create more internal rotation into the ground. So again, all these compensatory strategies are somebody that is incapable of maintaining the appropriate ER bias and producing force through this early towards middle propulsive strategy. So obvious substitutions then under those circumstances, you drop them down to their knees. So a typical push-up is going to be somewhere in the general vicinity of 75% of the body weight load on the hand in the bottom position to about 70% of the top, give or take a few percentage points. If you drop them to your knees, it's going to be about 60 at the highest load and 50 at the least. And then obviously if that doesn't work, then you can move them to an elevated position where you would do something where you just put a bar in a rack and basically you're just elevating the floor, so to speak, and reducing the amount of load on the hands. So Malti, I hope this answers your question for you. I think you need to continue with your cues for the ER bias, but also make sure that you're modifying the exercise appropriately so people can actually execute a decent push-up. If you have any other questions, please give it to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and I will see you guys tomorrow.